November had settled over the town of Moscow, Idaho. The leaves had mostly fallen, the days were shorter, and the nights came quickly, wrapping the small college town in a quiet darkness. Moscow was the kind of place where people rarely locked their doors, where the most common sound on a Friday night was the chatter of students heading downtown or the faint music spilling from a house party. To anyone driving through, it looked like a postcard of American campus life, safe, ordinary, predictable, but behind that sense of calm, something was waiting, a shadow that would creep into this town and change it forever. This is the story of the Idaho College Murders, the night that shocked America. The victims were 4 students, each with a life full of promise, each completely unaware of the horror awaiting them. Kaylee Goncalves was 21, vibrant, full of energy, the kind of young woman who filled a room just by walking in. She was known among her friends for her loyalty and sense of humour, someone who always kept people laughing, even on their hardest days. Madison Mogan, also 21, was her best friend since childhood. The bond between Kaylee and Maddie was inseparable. They were more like sisters than friends, always side by side, planning adventures, finishing each other's sentences. Their closeness was a comfort to everyone who knew them. Then there was Zana Kerner, a free-spirited, strong-willed student who loved to live in the moment. She had a warm presence and a wild streak that made her unforgettable. With Zana that night was her boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, also 20, a triplet who came from a close-knit family. Ethan was playful, kind-hearted and protective. Together the 4 represented everything youthful and alive, everything hopeful about college life. None of them could have imagined that they would not live to see the sunrise on November 13th, 2022. The house where they lived, a 3-story rental on King Road, had become a well-known hangout among friends. With 6 bedrooms, it was a busy student house, a place of laughter, music and late-night studying. On that November weekend, the energy was no different. Kaylee had just come back to town to show off her new Range Rover and spend time with Maddie before moving to Texas for a new job. They planned a fun night together, a night to celebrate and enjoy their friendship. Zana and Ethan had gone to a nearby fraternity party earlier that evening. Everyone was in their own bubble, enjoying the weekend as young people do. As the night stretched on, Moscow seemed peaceful. The quiet streets, the dim porch lights and the sound of wind moving through the trees, it was also ordinary. Around 1:30 a.m, Kaylee and Maddie left a bar downtown and made their way to a food truck, a place well known among students for late night snacks. CCTV footage would later show the 2 laughing and chatting, completely carefree, waiting for their order while other students talked. Nothing seemed out of place, just 2 best friends grabbing a bite before heading home. By 1:56 a.m, they'd been given a ride back to their house on King Road. At around the same time, Zana and Ethan were finishing up at the fraternity house party. They left sometime after midnight and returned to the King Road house shortly before 2 a.m. Upstairs, 2 other roommates, Dylan and Bethany, had also returned home earlier and were already in their rooms. The house was full that night, but everyone was following their own routine, retreating into the safety of their bedrooms. No one realized that safety was an illusion. What happened next would become one of the most disturbing mysteries in American crime history. Somewhere in the dark, an intruder was moving, a figure who had planned this night, who had studied the victims, who had chosen this house with chilling precision. Between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m, when the world outside was still, when the students were either asleep or just settling in, the shadow entered the King Road home. What unfolded inside was a nightmare. The details of that night are both horrifying and confusing. Police would later describe the murders as brutal and targeted. The killer moved from room to room, attacking with a large, fixed-blade knife. Kaylee and Maddie, found together in Maddie's room on the 3rd floor, were killed in their sleep. Zana and Ethan on the 2nd floor were attacked as well. Evidence suggested that Zana may have fought back a terrifying struggle in the darkness. The killer left 4 young lives destroyed, and yet 2 roommates on the ground floor were left unharmed. Why? No one knew. By late morning, when friends came by the house and one of the surviving roommates made a frantic call to 911, Moscow police were faced with a scene unlike anything they had ever witnessed. 4 college students, dead in their own home, murdered in the early hours of the night. Word spread like wildfire. Within hours, the campus was in panic. Parents began calling their children, desperate to know if they were safe. Rumours flew, fear spread, and the quiet town was transformed into a place of horror. Police tried to reassure the public, calling the murders an isolated, targeted attack. But the words did little to calm anyone. How could this be targeted when no suspect was named? How could it be safe when a killer was out there, free, possibly watching from the shadows. For days, students packed up and left town, classes emptied, and dorm rooms went silent. Moscow became a ghost town, haunted by the question who killed them and why. As investigators combed the crime scene, clues were sparse. No murder weapon was found, no sign of forced entry, no immediate suspect. It was as if the killer had slipped in and out of the house like a phantom. But police knew one thing. Whoever did this had left something behind. Somewhere in the house, in the chaos, there had to be evidence. The task was to find it before the trail went cold, and so began one of the most intense manhunts in recent American history. Detectives worked around the clock. The FBI and state police joined the investigation. Every tip was logged, every camera in town was checked. The small town of Moscow found itself swarming with reporters, TV trucks lining the streets, and speculation running wild. Everyone had a theory, everyone had a suspect in mind, but the truth was buried beneath layers of fear and uncertainty. The murders of 4 University of Idaho students had left the town of Moscow in shock, but it wasn't just the town that was shaken. Within 24 hours, the story had gone national. News outlets across America carried the headline, 4 college students slain in Idaho home. The brutality of the crime, the youth of the victims, and the apparent lack of motive turned this case into a national obsession. The public demanded answers, but investigators had almost nothing concrete to give. For detectives on the ground, the pressure was suffocating. Moscow was a small-town police department not accustomed to dealing with quadruple homicides. The arrival of the FBI and Idaho State Police helped, but the crime scene itself was a nightmare. 6 roommates, countless friends who came and went from the house, and a busy social environment made the evidence trail difficult to untangle. The killer had been precise, leaving behind almost nothing visible, but investigators clung to one crucial belief: no killer leaves without leaving something behind. The surviving roommates were questioned extensively. Their 911 call, made just before noon on November 13th, was described as frantic, confusing, and full of fear. Reports indicated they had initially believed one of the victims was unconscious, not realizing the scale of what had happened until police arrived. The roommates were quickly ruled out as suspects, but their statements painted a picture of a normal night turned nightmare. They hadn't heard screams loud enough to alarm them, though one later recalled strange noises like crying and a voice saying, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." A chilling detail that left investigators certain the killer had moved silently, confidently through the home. As days turned into weeks, the case became a media circus. Reporters crowded every street near the university. Students, many of whom were already afraid, found themselves followed by cameras, asked for statements, their grief and fear dissected for the evening news. Parents drove hundreds of miles to bring their children home, unwilling to risk leaving them in a town where a killer still roamed free. Professors held classes over Zoom, dorms emptied. Moscow had never seen anything like it. The internet only made things worse. Amateur sleuths began dissecting every second of footage, every interview, every detail released by police. On TikTok, Instagram and YouTube, theories spread like wildfire. Some pointed fingers at the surviving roommates, others at ex-boyfriends, neighbours, even complete strangers who had appeared in CCTV footage downtown. Each theory grew more extreme than the last, adding fuel to the storm. For investigators, it was like chasing shadows in a hall of mirrors. But beneath the noise, detectives were quietly piecing together something significant. They began combing through thousands of hours of surveillance footage from around Moscow. Somewhere they believed the killer's vehicle would appear, and soon it did. Just after 3:30 a.m. on the night of the murders, a white Hyundai Elantra was seen passing near the King Road home multiple times. The car circled the block again and again, behaviour investigators described as suspicious and unusual. After the murders, the same car sped away. It was the first real lead. Detectives issued a public request for help identifying the driver of a white Hyundai Elantra, model years 2011 to 2013. Within days, tips poured in. The net was slowly tightening. Still weeks behind, with no arrest, the families of the victims grew increasingly frustrated. In press conferences, Kaylee's parents spoke through tears, demanding answers, begging police to find who had done this to their daughter and her friends. Madison's family echoed their grief. Zana and Ethan's loved ones too were drowning in pain. 4 young lives had been taken brutally, and every day without an arrest felt like another insult, another injustice. As Christmas approached, many feared the case would go cold. But what the public didn't know was that investigators were already zeroing in on a suspect. The white Elantra had been traced to a man named Brian Koberger, a 28-year-old a PhD student at Washington State University, just 10 miles from Moscow. Koberger was not the type of suspect anyone expected. He was a criminology student, someone who studied the psychology of criminals, who wrote academic papers about the minds of killers. He lived in Pullman, Washington, across the state line, and had been teaching classes on criminal behavior. To the outside world, he appeared quiet, intelligent, maybe socially awkward, but no one imagined him capable of slaughtering 4 innocent students. And yet the more investigators dug, the more the pieces fell into place. Cell phone records placed Koberger near the King Road house multiple times in the weeks before the murders, as if he had been surveilling the area. On the night of the killings, his phone was suspiciously turned off between 2:47 a.m. and 4:48 a.m., the exact window of the murders. His white Elantra was caught on cameras near the scene, and most chilling of all, a piece of evidence inside the crime scene sealed his fate. A knife sheath left near Kaylee and Madison's bodies, stamped with US military markings. On it, investigators found a single male DNA sample. It matched Brian Koberger. The case against him was forming into a devastating portrait. Koberger had not only left DNA, but had also been caught on surveillance footage and betrayed by his own cell phone. Still, detectives moved carefully. They spent weeks tracking him, building a case airtight enough to withstand the inevitable scrutiny of trial. By late December, Koberger had driven cross-country with his father from Washington back to Pennsylvania, where his family lived. Investigators followed him quietly the entire way. They retrieved trash from his parents' home, matching DNA from his father to the sample found on the knife sheath. The confirmation was undeniable. They had their man. On December 30th, 2022, in the early morning hours, police swarmed the Koberger family home in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. Brian Koberger was taken into custody without incident. The arrest was broadcast across every network in America. The face of the alleged killer was revealed, pale, hollow-eyed, expressionless. A criminology student turned accused murderer. For the families of the victims, the arrest was a moment of relief, but also renewed pain. They had answers, but no answer could ever bring back Kaylee, Madison, Zana, or Ethan. For the people of Moscow, the nightmare was not over. The trial was yet to come. The why of it all, why 4 young lives had been targeted, why their futures were ripped away, remained unanswered. The arrest of Brian Koberger on December 30th, 2022 stunned the nation. When his mugshot was released, his expression blank, his eyes sunken, his face almost ghostly, millions stared at it, searching for something, anything, that explained how this man could have been capable of such horror. To many he looked ordinary, unremarkable, even forgettable, and that was perhaps the most terrifying part. A criminology student, a man who had studied the very crimes he was now accused of committing, had lived right next door to Moscow, quietly walking among students and professors, while allegedly harbouring the darkest of impulses. As details began to trickle out, the picture of Brian Koberger grew stranger. At Washington State University, where he was pursuing his PhD, he had been known as intelligent but arrogant, a teaching assistant who often graded harshly and rubbed students the wrong way. Some described him as socially awkward, someone who struggled to connect with others, who sometimes seemed to hover in conversations rather than join them. And yet, beneath his quiet exterior, investigators believed he'd been planning something monstrous. Court documents revealed disturbing information. Koberger's cell phone had pinged near the King Road house at least a dozen times before the murders. He had been there late at night, watching, learning the routines of the people inside. He had studied criminology, even posting online surveys asking ex-criminals about their thoughts and emotions during crimes, as if probing the psychology of killing in preparation for his own. He had even been pulled over twice during his cross-country drive back to Pennsylvania with his father, body cam footage later showed.
Court documents revealed disturbing information. Koberger's cell phone had pinged near the King Road house at least a dozen times before the murders. He had been there late at night, watching, learning the routines of the people inside. He had studied criminology, even posting online surveys, asking ex-criminals about their thoughts and emotions during crimes, as if probing the psychology of killing in preparation for his own. He had even been pulled over twice during his cross-country drive back to Pennsylvania with his father. Body cam footage later showed him nervous, but calm, masking the truth of what police were closing in on. But the most chilling piece of evidence remained the knife sheath left at the crime scene. The fact that it was left behind suggested a moment of carelessness, a human slip in an otherwise meticulously planned crime. That sheath, with his DNA, tied him irrevocably to the scene. No matter how much he might try to explain it away, investigators knew it was their smoking gun. The families of the victims, though grateful for the arrest, were plunged into another painful chapter, the wait for justice. Every court appearance brought Bryan Kohberger back into the public eye. His calm demeanor infuriating parents who had lost their children. Kaylee's father called him a coward. Madison's family said they wanted to look him in the eyes and demand why. Zana's family, devastated, spoke about the unbearable silence she left behind. Ethan's family remembered the laughter he brought into every room. 4 different lives, 4 different futures, all stolen in the same night, all reduced to evidence in a courtroom battle. The trial became one of the most anticipated in recent American history. Legal experts debated endlessly on television about whether the case was airtight or whether Kohberger's defense team might find cracks. There were discussions about his mental state, about whether he fit the mold of other killers who had studied criminology, as if fascinated by the very crimes they later committed. The public was divided between those convinced of his guilt and those waiting to see if the evidence would withstand the courtroom. Meanwhile, Moscow itself struggled to heal. The King Roadhouse, once a place of laughter and student life, had become a grim landmark. Crowds gathered to leave flowers, candles, and photos of the victims. The university held vigils where thousands gathered, holding candles in the winter, cold, saying the victims' names aloud so they would never be forgotten. But no matter how many lights were lit, the darkness of what had happened remained. The story of the Idaho College murders resonated across America because it touched on something primal: fear of being attacked in the one place we believe we are safe, our own homes. That night showed how fragile safety can be, how quickly normal life can be shattered by someone lurking just beyond the walls. Parents who once waved goodbye to their children at college with smiles now did so with fear. Students who once walked home from parties without worry now looked over their shoulders. Moscow would never again be the same small, quiet town it had been. And then there was the larger question. Why? Why would Bryan Kohberger, with no personal connection to the victims, target these 4 students? Was it a compulsion, an obsession, an experiment for someone obsessed with the criminal mind? Investigators admitted that, even with all the evidence, the true motive might never fully be known. The absence of a clear reason only deepened the horror. It meant the killings were not just tragic but incomprehensible. In the end, the Idaho College murders became more than just a crime story. They became a symbol of vulnerability, a reminder of how evil can exist in the most unexpected places. They revealed how a single night can tear apart families, scar a community, and captivate an entire nation. The faces of Kaylee, Madison, Shauna, and Ethan would be remembered not just for how they died, but for who they were: young, vibrant, full of life. And the face of Bryan Kohberger would be remembered as the chilling reminder that sometimes the monsters we fear most don't look like monsters at all. They look like people we pass in hallways, sit beside in classrooms, or see in the grocery store. As the legal process stretched on, one truth remained: nothing could bring back the 4 lives stolen that night. Justice, however it came, would never fill the silence left behind in their families' homes. But America would not forget. The night of November 13th, 2022, would forever stand as a dark scar in the history of true crime. A night of laughter turned into terror. A night that began like any other, but ended as one of the most chilling and senseless murders the nation had ever seen. This was the night that shocked America. The Idaho College Murders.